OPB Podcasts.
From the Gert Boyle studio, it's OPB Politics Now for Thursday, May 14th. Election Day is just a few days away. By now, voters across the state are reviewing their ballots or trying to find them in the first place. For voters in Central and Eastern Oregon, there are some key races on the May ballot and big issues driving the politics behind the scenes. Last week, we talked about the suburbs. This week, we're here to take a closer look at the politics playing out east of the Cascades. Welcome to the podcast. I'm OPB politics reporter Bryce Dole.
I'm Antonio Sierra, the Rural Communities reporter.
And I'm Kathryn Styer Martinez, Ben reporter.
Antonio, Kathryn, thank you guys so much for being here. It's great to talk to both of you.
Thanks, Bryce.
Thanks.
Antonio, let's start with you. You live and work in Pendleton, right? We've spent so much time on this show talking about homelessness policies in Portland and how they're, a key factor in races in the Willamette Valley and just Democratic politics writ large in Oregon. But as we know, housing and homelessness is, a big issue across Oregon, including in a lot of the rural communities that you cover. Just tell us a little bit about how this issue is kind of playing out in Pendleton right now.
Yeah, this issue really came to a head last year. Last summer, there was a Pendleton City Council meeting. This new community group called Neighbors for a Better Pendleton was formed by local business leaders and prominent citizens. And they rallied really one of the biggest crowds anyone's ever seen to go to the city council meeting and really kind of organize complaints against homelessness in Pendleton. They had a number of policy recommendations to the city council to adopt. That includes things like a ban on new social services in the downtown core, transporting transient people out of the community and back to their communities of origin, and steeper legal penalties for repeat offenders to some of the city's ordinances and laws. The city council hasn't adopted any of those things. And since then, they've kind of organized politically and they've endorsed a slate of candidates in the Pendleton City Council election. There's five seats up for election, and that would be a majority of the council. And so it's interesting because it's a small town. And so everything is really close together, especially when you're looking at the downtown core. One of the things that I've been focusing on with my work is I took a look at the Salvation Army, which provides one of the social services that that they would like to ban, or not necessarily ban, but ban new social services like the Salvation Army. And then across the street is a dance studio called the Junior Jam Studio. The owner of that, Debbie Kishpaw, is running for the at-large seat. The incumbent in that seat, it runs a business a block away, the Great Pacific Wine and Coffee Company. And so all of them are really close together. There's a lot of opinions flying across the city, and it should be a very interesting race.
Can you kind of give us a picture about what homelessness looks like in Pendleton? Here in Portland, there are, obviously big, homelessness encampments, different kinds of structures throughout the city. Just tell us a little bit about what the situation looks like there.
Yeah, there are similarities and there are differences, right? Unlike Portland, you're probably not going to see like massive tent camps or people in very large groups gathered together to sleep. However, you will see an occasional camp in the downtown area. A lot of people also camp out by the Umatilla River. I think because of that, a lot of people try to stay out of sight. That avoids both public scrutiny and police scrutiny. So some of that is not completely visible. However, there are a lot of people saying that there's still some very big effects from the amount of people that are sleeping unsheltered. There are a lot of complaints about vandalism, break-ins, other kinds of petty crimes. And there really aren't a ton of social services. If somebody does not have money to pay for their own housing, they can stay at a seasonal warming station. However, that's not open during times where there's an extreme heat or extreme cold. There's also kind of a transitional housing project called the Promise Inn, but space is limited, and the stay, I think, is limited to only a few months. So there are not a ton of options out there for folks.
Yeah, that was going to be my question. Obviously throughout the state of, people talk about there being an affordable housing shortage in rural communities, and I can imagine that is, a similar issue for folks living in Pendleton too, right?
Yeah, I mean, housing is a big issue. I tracked down a city study, and they said that there are short over 400 units
Wow.
for low income housing in terms of people who make $20,000 or less per year, which would probably be a lot of folks that are now living on the streets.
Okay. So this issue, like you said, has spilled into political circles, but it's also, in the legal system too. Tell us about how this has played out on your beat and what you've been covering as this relates to the legal system.
Right, right. It's a really interesting case because obviously we have a group of folks that are saying that Pendleton is not doing enough to enforce some of its homelessness laws.
Okay.
But there actually is another group that's saying that the city's enforcement is actually far too strict. There are 5 unhoused residents that are currently suing the city, saying that the system as it's set up now makes it difficult to rest. There is kind of a right to rest map that the city maintains, but the folks that are subject to that map say that it is inconsistently enforced, that it's confusing, and that the hours that the city provides to rest are too short. So that litigation is still active, and both sides are negotiating a settlement. And so whenever a settlement is reached, that could lead to some major policy changes for how the city approaches homelessness.
I see. So let's go back to some of the city council races that you're talking about. Tell us about how homelessness is kind of cropping up in in some of these races that you're covering.
Yeah, the incumbent city council, they're trying to project a kind of a moderate, sensible, pragmatic approach to homelessness. And that is kind of a bit of a dividing line between how the incumbent council is handling and how the challengers want to approach things. I really honed in on the at-large district race. There's only a couple of seats that cover the whole city. And the competition between Addison Schulberg and Debbie Kishpaw is that race. Schulberg told me that he wants to continue work on the city's housing goals, but he doesn't want Pendleton to cross a threshold of being inhumane.
They are people, and they need to exist in places. They are Pendletonians, whether they're an official resident here or not.
The challenger, Debbie Kishpaw, she's really motivated by her own personal negative experiences with homeless folks. She details pretty vividly the amount of damage and negative encounters that she's had over the years, and she really is really clear that she doesn't hate people that are unhoused, but that she really thinks that the city could be doing better on it.
Well, I'm angry at the situation, and we can do better. What exactly that is, I'm not sure, but I know that we can do better.
So most of these elections should be resolved next week. However, there are some races where there are several candidates, so this issue could drag out into November.
I see. So it's kind of, seems like a classic debate around homelessness between, these ideas of preserving downtown corridors and livability and, the businesses that work there. And then also, people on the other side being like, hey, these are people, these are humans. We need to do what we can to help them as best we can. So anyways, it sounds like, it's reminiscent of a lot of the homelessness discussions that we hear across the state, including here in Portland.
Yeah, it is eerily familiar where all the battle lines are being drawn and what the arguments are being made. It's just being done in a town of 17,000 rather in a city of 500,000 people.
Right. So given that, what then surprised you or has surprised you about how this race is playing out politically?
Yeah, the interesting thing about Pendleton city politics is it's usually pretty tame, to the point where there's not always a lot of participation in these races. In the last election cycle, or I guess 4 years ago when these seats were last up, Addison Schulberg had to be convinced to run for the election at all. And when he did enter his name, he was the only candidate. It's not uncommon for not only in city council, but for local political office, just to see one candidate or even no candidates and have a write-in have to win the seat. I think the other thing that was interesting to me is that a lot of people were focusing on local enforcement, but when I spoke with a housing expert, he said the problem really is bigger than that. This is more of a federal issue because this is a national issue. And the thing that ties every community together, whether you're a Portland or you're Pendleton, is the lack of affordable housing. And you need the largesse of a federal government to really help make a dent in that.
Right. Okay, Kathryn, let's turn to you. You're in Bend, in Deschutes County, which, continues to be one of the fastest growing, if not the fastest growing county in the state. At least it was at one point. Antonio was talking a moment ago about, cost of living and affordable housing being a key issue in Eastern Oregon. I know that's also been, a key issue in Deschutes County, to say the least. Tell us about how this is playing out in some of the races that you're paying close attention to.
You're totally right, Bryce. It's a big topic out here. It's definitely been a big topic for the last 2 years in the county and, most likely beyond. It's a key issue for a lot of the campaigns. So what I'm seeing is candidates are discussing affordability either directly or through a housing lens. So candidates are they have some ideas on how to address the problem, like building more homes, making it faster to build them, or implementing fees on second homes and short-term rentals.
I see. So the main event in your neck of the woods seems to me to be the Deschutes County Commission races, right? There's just one incumbent there who's vying for a seat. What can you tell us about some of the dynamics playing out in that race?
Yeah, so since Patty Adair isn't running for re-election this year, that leaves Tony DeBone as the sole incumbent county commissioner. And he's running against two others for position one. And what's interesting, but maybe not surprising, is this race has the highest donation amounts of any other commission race happening right now. Yeah. So since 2014, DeBone, who's a Republican, has raised the most cash and in-kind contributions in his competitions and also has beat his competitors. But this year, he's been outraised and outspent by Democrat and challenger Jamie Collins. I pulled the campaign finance reports on Tuesday, and Collins had raised almost $65,000 more than DeBone. And to put that in perspective, DeBone raised less than that when he won his second term for commissioner in 2014.
I can only wonder if that is maybe partly due to some of I know at least the city of Bend, and I don't know about Redmond, but Bend certainly has been becoming, increasingly liberal over the last several years. And I just wonder if that might have an impact on some of those fundraising trends. I don't know.
It totally does. Yeah, I spoke with a political science professor from the University of Oregon who said that as races become more competitive, i.e. as you get more of a political mixture of ideologies in a place, competitions do become more costly, or they can or they tend to become more costly.
I see. Tell us about some of the other issues other than homelessness that are kind of highlighting or underscoring the races that you're covering.
Yeah, so zoning and development are big items out here also. Commissioners generally make decisions about zoning in rural areas outside of city limits. So that means like rezoning farmlands or greater residential use for larger resorts. Thornburg comes to mind. So candidates are mixed when it comes to zoning. Most recognize the need for more housing, but they're split on when and where to allow county land to be rezoned. The county does weigh in on urban growth boundary applications, and candidates were split on whether they were for or against those expansions. Another one is wildfire preparedness and climate disaster. That's also a pressing issue in Deschutes County. Candidates' concerns They ranged from, maintaining defensible space around homes to countywide preparedness plans, home insurance, and concerns about what some area residents are starting to call "quote unquote" smoke season,
Right.
when wildfire smoke just blankets Central Oregon.
Right. I remember that being a huge aspect of things when I lived in Bend for a couple of years. Okay, the commission it has expanded the number of seats that it has, right? And it's expanded them to 5. Am I understanding this correctly?
Yeah, that's right. The commission expanded from 3 to 5 seats in 2024. So that means a record number of 4 commission seats are up for grabs right now.
I see. And this could just be a precursor to a larger, fight in November around the commission and how members are elected, right? Tell us kind of what you expect around that.
Yeah. So the districting map has been a hot topic since last year. Shortly after voters approved expanding the commission from 3 to 5, Commissioners Adair and DeBone moved to create representational districts, or sort of start the process to create a map that voters have to either, deny or approve. And critics of the effort called the maps gerrymandered when all was said and done, and a map was created and sent forth to the commission. DeBone called the map reasonable and voted to put it on the November ballot. OPB asked candidates if they supported the proposed district map going before voters, and 8 out of the 15 respondents said yes. So it's not cut and dry that this issue is following party lines, but every Deschutes Republican-backed candidate said yes, and endorsed Deschutes Democrat candidate said no.
I see. Let's go ahead and take a break, and then we'll talk about an incumbent facing a challenge in the legislature in Eastern Oregon. Antonio, quickly, we're going to go back to you. There are a handful of interesting legislative primary races throughout Oregon this year. But for the first time in a very long time, the longest tenured member of the legislature is facing a real challenger, right? Talk to us a little bit about Greg Smith.
Yeah, Greg Smith represents District 57. Those lines have changed a lot over the years, but right now it primarily represents Eastern Oregon and some of the more rural expanses of North Central Oregon. Smith has really cultivated a reputation as being a bipartisan deal maker. He's a Republican who is willing to cross the aisle at times, especially if it results in money going to his district. I think one of the other things that has really popped up over the past few years is that he's also been scrutinized for some of his ethical conflicts. By day, Greg Smith is an economic development consultant, and the sadly defunct Malheur Enterprise has investigated the ties between his legislative work and his business venture. That's kind of culminated late last year when the Oregon Government Ethics Commission found that he violated ethics law when he sought a raise for himself as the director of a Hermiston area industrial park. The Attorney General's office is also suing him among a group of local Morrow County officials. They say that he helped facilitate the sale of a nonprofit broadband company that resulted in a windfall for a handful of Morrow County officials. When asked about that lawsuit, he said he didn't benefit from the deal and he didn't know about any kind of wider scheme for self-enrichment.
I see. And talk to us about the challenger in this race. Who is Greg Smith facing next week?
Yeah, Jim Doherty is the challenger to Greg Smith. Doherty is a former Morrow County commissioner. He's running a populist campaign. When he was county commissioner, he focused a lot on the nitrate crisis in the lower Umatilla Basin. That's where groundwater has been polluted with nitrates and folks don't have safe drinking water, and he's really focusing on that as a state level issue that he's running on. He's talked a lot about data centers and some of the drawbacks they have had on Morrow and Umatilla counties. And he's also talked about good government and really contrasted some of the ethical concerns that Greg Smith has had with his own record. However, Doherty brings some baggage of his home. He was recalled from office in 2022. that the stated reason by the people who recalled him was over some local controversies like ambulance service, but he thinks it's because his work on nitrate pollution and some of the powerful people that he angered was the reason he was recalled. He ran for state senate in 2024, but came in a distant second to Todd Nash, so he doesn't have a spotless electoral record.
I see. Who else have you talked to about this race generally? Like, what are people expecting around turnout, around like how things might play out?
Yeah, I spoke with Eastern Oregon University political science professor Dustin Ellis about this race. And one thing that we talked about is that District 57 has among the lowest turnout rates in the entire state. They're consistently in the bottom 5 of turnout. So I asked Ellis about this, and he told me part of that is that the demographics of the district. There is a very significant Latino population in the district, in Hermiston, Umatilla, Boardman, those kinds of communities. That's typically a lower turnout group. So that might affect that. In the last round of redistricting, the district gained the Warm Springs Reservation, and Native Americans have historically had a lot of barriers to voting, so that may also be playing a role. But one of the other interesting things that we talked about is that Greg Smith has been such a dominant force in Eastern Oregon politics for so long that folks might just get apathetic. They might not turn out to vote for someone they think will win an election, regardless of who is running against him. Smith has won Republican primaries before where he's been challenged, and Democrats don't usually enter the race. So a lot of times he's the only one who's on the general election ballot.
I see. Well, Antonio, Kathryn, thank you guys so much for being here. We really appreciate it. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
This week's episode of OPB Politics Now was recorded in the Gert Boyle studio. It was produced by Andrew Thien, and our audio engineer is Nalene Silva. Our music comes from Audio Network. We'll be back next week with more political news from across the Pacific Northwest. Until then, you can find all of OPB's reporting at opb.org. Thanks for your support, and thanks for listening.